Hello, my name is Elliot and I'm 30 years old. Today I sit here in an old wheelchair in a small room at a disability support center in Ohio to tell you the story of my life. Outside the window it's raining, as if tapping a rhythm to the memories I've tried to bury but can never escape. I'm not a millionaire with tens of millions in my bank account, nor do I live in a luxurious mansion with expensive cars. I'm just a survivor carrying scars on both my body and soul. But to tell this story, I have to go back to the beginning, the place where it all started, a rundown neighborhood in Ohio, where I was once a boy with big dreams before everything was torn apart. I was born in a place they called River Bottom, a name that already reeked of despair. It was a corner of Cleveland where dilapidated wooden houses crowded together, and the smell of engine oil and garbage mingled in the air as if it were part of life. My home was a two-bedroom apartment with stained, yellowed walls and a leaky roof whenever it rained. My father, Carl, did odd jobs at an auto repair shop, coming home with blackened hands and breath heavy with beer. My mother, Linda, worked as a waitress at a small diner where she forced a smile to earn a few bucks in tips. We were poor, so poor that dinner was often just peanut butter sandwiches, and I learned not to ask for anything beyond what my parents could provide. But I was a kid, and kids always find a way to dream, don't they? I loved running around the neighborhood, climbing piles of old tires behind my dad's shop, imagining myself as an explorer in a jungle. I had a best friend, Tommy, a scrawny kid with messy red hair who always told me about spaceships from the science fiction books he borrowed from the library. "Elliot," he'd say, "one day you and I are going to get out of this hellhole, you'll see." I believed him. I believed that one day I'd become someone, do something great. Then when I was 9, everything changed. One chilly autumn morning, my mother called me into the kitchen. She was wearing an old, worn-out sweater, but her eyes were different. Tense, as if she were hiding a big secret. "Elliot, you're staying home from school today," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "We're taking you for a health checkup, a special place." Naively, I asked, "What kind of checkup, Mom?" "I'm not sick." My father, leaning against the doorway, just muttered, "Don't ask too many questions, let's go." We piled into my dad's rickety old truck, which I jokingly called the coughing machine because of the way the engine sputtered. The drive lasted hours, leaving River Bottom behind, passing through empty fields until we reached a gray building standing alone by the highway. It didn't look like a hospital, more like a warehouse with no signs, no people coming or going, just a heavy iron door and a few cars parked outside. I held my mother's hand, feeling the coldness of her palm seep into me. "Don't be scared, Elliot," she whispered, but she was the one trembling. Inside, everything was eerily clean. The floors gleamed, and the air smelled faintly of antiseptic. A man in a white lab coat wearing steel-rimmed glasses introduced himself as Dr. Harris. He smiled, but his smile didn't make me feel safe. "Healthy young boy," he said, patting my shoulder. "Just a few small tests and you'll be home in no time." I don't remember much of what happened next. They took me to a stark white room, told me to lie on a cold metal table. A needle pricked my arm, then another in my neck. I felt drowsy, my eyelids heavy, and the world faded to black. When I woke up, I was back in my bed at the apartment, my head pounding and my body exhausted like I'd been running all day. My mother sat beside me, stroking my hair. "You're fine," she said, but her eyes avoided mine. I asked what they did to me, but they only said, "Just a checkup, don't worry." I wanted to believe them, but something felt wrong. I felt different, like a part of me had been taken away. A few weeks later, I started getting weaker. At first, it was sharp pains in my legs, like needles stabbing me. Then I started falling more and more often until I couldn't run anymore. One afternoon, while trying to climb the tire pile like I always did, I fell hard, my knees slamming into the ground, and I couldn't get up. Tommy panicked and ran to get my dad. My father came and carried me home, but instead of concern, he just muttered, "Why weren't you more careful?" I cried not from the pain, but from the helplessness swallowing me whole. Over the next few months, my legs grew increasingly numb. I couldn't walk without crutches, and eventually a doctor at the local hospital diagnosed me with paralysis of the lower body. A rare neurological disorder, they said, but no one explained why. My parents didn't take me for further tests or seek treatment. They just bought me an old wheelchair that creaked every time I moved. While I struggled with my body, my family began to transform. First came a new car, a shiny SUV, a far cry from the coughing machine. Then one day, my parents announced we were moving. A fresh start, my mother said, but her smile wasn't genuine. We left River Bottom for a fancy suburb with houses boasting manicured lawns and white picket fences. The new house was spacious, with a living room fireplace and a modern kitchen with granite countertops. Me, a 10-year-old in a wheelchair, felt out of place in that space, like an object that didn't belong. I asked my dad, "How can we afford this house?" He gave a faint smile. "Business is better now. Don't ask too many questions." But I wasn't stupid. I saw the thick envelopes my parents hid in drawers, the late-night phone calls they had in hushed tones, the hours they'd leave the house without explanation. My mother started wearing nicer clothes, jewelry, and my father had a shiny new watch. But they never looked at me the way they used to. The little warmth I'd once seen in their eyes was gone, replaced by a coldness, as if I were a debt they wanted to forget. I tried to adapt. I learned to navigate the wide hallways of the new house in my wheelchair, tried to get to know the neighborhood kids who looked at me like I was some kind of oddity. Tommy was no longer nearby, and I lost my only friend. At my new school, I was isolated. Classmates whispered behind my back, calling me the cripple. I started hiding in books, adventure stories I borrowed from the school library. In those pages, I could be a knight, an astronaut, anyone but the boy trapped in a broken body. My parents grew more distant. They stopped asking about school, stopped telling stories like they used to. Dinners became silent affairs, with me alone at one end of the table while my parents talked about their plans, trips, investments. Once I overheard my mother say to my father, "Just a few more years, Carl. Then everything will be fine." I didn't know what everything meant, but her voice sent chills down my spine. I started noticing strange details. Once, while sneaking into my father's study to find paper and a pen, I found a thick stack of documents with words I didn't understand. Clinical trial, consent, compensation. I didn't dare ask, because every time I tried to bring something up, my parents would brush me off or snap. "Don't meddle in adult business, Elliot," my father yelled once, slamming his hand on the table so hard a glass of water spilled. When I was 11, my mother got pregnant. I thought it might be a chance for our family to grow closer. I imagined having a sibling to play with, to share stories with, since I had no one else. But when Ryan was born, all my hopes crumbled. Ryan was a healthy baby with bright eyes and a smile that melted everyone. My parents looked at him like he was a treasure, while I became a shadow in my own home. Everything changed quickly. My parents poured all their attention into Ryan. They bought him expensive toys, took him to the park, snapped hundreds of photos. Meanwhile, I was left in my room with my wheelchair and old books. Once I asked my mother why they didn't take me along to the zoo. She looked at me, her eyes cold as stone. "Elliot, you'd just complicate things." Those words cut deeper than any needle I'd ever felt. I started hearing harsher words. Useless, burden, a disaster from the past. My parents no longer hid their disappointment when they looked at me. One night I overheard them arguing in the living room. "If it weren't for him, things would be so much easier," my father said, his voice hoarse. My mother replied, "We did what we had to, Carl. No regrets." I lay in bed, tears silently falling, trying to understand why I'd become the unwanted one in my family. I didn't know then that those years were just the beginning of a bigger nightmare. The secrets my parents were hiding, the needles in that sterile white room from years ago, were all waiting to explode, tearing my life apart once more. But back then, I was just a boy, trying to survive the loneliness, unaware that I'd been sold long ago. At 18 years old, the age when people dream of faraway travels, wild parties, or at the very least a wide-open future, I, Elliot, saw it as just another number. It marked another year of living as a shadow in my own home. Sitting in my creaky wheelchair, I gazed out my bedroom window at the golden leaves falling in the Ohio twilight. It was Thanksgiving, and the fancy suburban house was buzzing with preparations for a big feast. But my heart felt cold, as if winter had arrived early, choking out any lingering hope. Over the years since Ryan was born, I'd grown used to the indifference. My parents, Carl and Linda, no longer bothered pretending to care about me. I was the burden, the disaster from the past, as they called me in their moments of frustration. Ryan, my 7-year-old brother, was the center of everyone's attention. With his radiant smile, bright eyes, and a future my parents endlessly praised, he was their pride and joy. "Ryan's going to do great things," my father would say, clapping him on the shoulder like a king passing down his crown. And me? I was just a paralyzed teenager, pushed into a corner of the house with my old books and long-dead dreams. But this Thanksgiving was different. I sensed it from early morning as my mother bustled in the kitchen preparing turkey, pumpkin pie, and dishes whose aromas I could only catch from a distance. She wore an elegant red dress, her hair perfectly curled, looking like a movie star. My father was busy setting the table, calling relatives, his voice brimming with excitement as if this were the most important day of his life. Ryan darted around the house in a tiny suit, giggling as aunts and uncles arrived, hugging him and saying, "You're truly the pride of the family." I stayed in my room, trying to ignore the commotion outside. I'd learned to retreat, like a snail hiding in its shell. But then my mother knocked on my door, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Elliot, come join us for the feast. It's a special day." I was surprised. How long had it been since they invited me to anything? I wheeled myself into the living room, my heart pounding, part of me hoping just this once I'd be treated like part of the family. The living room glowed under the chandelier's light. The long dining table was elaborately decorated with a pristine white tablecloth, sparkling wine glasses, and platters of fragrant food. Relatives and friends of my parents, people I'd only met a handful of times, filled the table, laughing and chatting boisterously. Ryan sat between my parents like a little king. I quietly wheeled myself to a corner of the table, trying not to bother anyone. A few people glanced at me, offering awkward smiles before quickly looking away. I was used to it, but tonight my parents' looks unnerved me. They exchanged glances, then looked at Ryan as if sharing a secret I wasn't allowed to know. The feast began. My father stood, raising his glass, his voice warm and steady. "Thank you all for being here today. Thanksgiving is a time to be grateful for what we have, and I'm proud to say that Linda and I have built a life worth dreaming of." The room erupted in applause with a few whistles. I looked down, fidgeting with the napkin on my lap, trying to ignore the growing sense of alienation in my chest. Then my father continued, his tone turning more serious. "But today, we want to share an important decision, a decision for the future of this family." I looked up, my heart racing. My mother held Ryan's hand, smiling brightly. My father scanned the table, his eyes passing over me as if I didn't exist, and said, "We've decided that all of the family's assets, this house, the cars, the stocks, everything we own, will be left to Ryan, our pride and joy." The room exploded with congratulations. Aunts and uncles clapped, praising Ryan, praising my parents for their wise decision. Ryan beamed, hugging my mother, who stroked his hair and whispered something that made him giggle. I sat there, frozen. The assets, the house, the future. All of it belonged to Ryan. And what about me? I didn't expect a share, didn't dream of money or property. But I wanted to be acknowledged, to be seen, to be loved as a son. Was I not worthy of that? I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. What about me? The question slipped out before I could think, soft but loud enough to silence the room. All eyes turned to me. My mother stiffened, her hand still on Ryan's shoulder. My father turned to me, his eyes cold as ice. He laughed, but it was a scornful, cutting laugh. "What about you, Elliot? What do you have to contribute? You've been a burden we've carried for 18 years too long." His words hit me like a hammer to the chest. The room spun. I heard whispers, quiet chuckles from some relatives. My mother said nothing, just looked down, as if ashamed I'd dared to speak. Ryan looked at me, his eyes innocent, not understanding what was happening. I wanted to scream, to slam the table, to do anything to prove I wasn't a burden, but I couldn't. I just sat there, hands gripping the arms of my wheelchair, tears welling up but held back by gritted teeth. I wouldn't cry in front of them, never. The feast continued as if my question had never existed. People laughed, clinked glasses, and toasted Ryan's bright future. I quietly wheeled myself out of the room unnoticed. I returned to my room, closed the door, and let the darkness swallow me. The pain wasn't just my father's words. It was 18 years of being abandoned, belittled, treated like a mistake. I looked around my room, the single bed, the old bookshelf, the adventure books that had been my refuge. They all belonged to this house, a house where I had no place. That night I didn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the laughter echoing from the living room. I thought about the years in River Bottom when my parents were poor but at least looked at me like their son. I thought about the needles in that sterile white room when I was 9, about the legs I lost, about my parents' sudden wealth. Something was wrong. I'd always felt it, but I'd never dared to face it. Tonight, when my father called me a burden, a piece of me shattered. I couldn't stay here anymore. I couldn't keep living in a house where I wasn't welcome. I sat up and turned on the desk lamp. With trembling hands, I started packing. I didn't have much that was truly mine: a few clothes, my favorite books, an old backpack. I grabbed a water bottle and some granola bars from the kitchen, sneaking around like a thief in my own home. I had no plan, no idea where I'd go. I just knew that if I stayed, I'd die, not my body, but my soul, which had been suffocated for too long. At the break of dawn, I wheeled myself out the back door where a small ramp my parents had built long ago but rarely used awaited. I paused one last time, looking at the lit-up house where my family still slept, unaware I was about to disappear. I thought of Ryan, the innocent boy, and wondered if one day he'd understand what I'd been through. I thought of my parents, once my entire world, now strangers. Then I turned away, wheeling down the foggy road, carrying my pain and a shattered soul. I had no money, no destination. I had only one thought: survive. I wheeled through the suburban streets, past houses slowly waking up. My arms ached, but I didn't stop. I made it to downtown Cleveland, where homeless people gathered under overpasses. An older woman in a tattered coat looked at me and asked, "You lost, kid?" I shook my head, my voice hoarse. "No. I just don't have a home anymore." She led me to a disability support center where I was given a temporary bed and a hot meal. I lay on the hard mattress, listening to the snores of strangers, wondering what I'd do next. I had nothing but my backpack and a heart full of wounds. But deep inside, a small fire began to burn, not hope, but rage. I wanted to know why my parents treated me this way. I wanted to understand why I lost my legs, why they got rich, why I became the burden. The days after I left home, I thought life couldn't possibly get any worse. But as if it were a cruel habit, life always found a way to remind me I was wrong. Living at the support center wasn't paradise, but it was a place where I could breathe. The people here, from the exhausted social workers to the homeless and disabled like me, each had their own stories, and I learned not to ask too many questions. I was given a small corner in the communal sleeping area, separated by a thin curtain. During the day, I'd wheel myself to a nearby park, reading books or watching people pass by, trying to find meaning in a world that had turned its back on me. But most of the time, I thought about my parents, Carl and Linda, and the words they spoke at that Thanksgiving dinner. "You're just a burden." Those words were like a knife lodged in my heart, and each day I felt it twist a little deeper. One afternoon, as I returned from the park, a staff member, Maria, called me over. She was a middle-aged woman with curly hair tied up high, always wearing a gentle smile despite the weariness in her eyes. "Elliot, there's a letter for you," she said, handing me a plain white envelope. I frowned. Who knew I was here? I hadn't told anyone I'd left home, and this center wasn't a place my parents' relatives or friends would seek out. The envelope had no sender's name, only a scrawled note in blue ink. To Elliot. I took the letter, my heart racing for reasons I couldn't explain. I wheeled myself back to my corner, pulled the curtain shut, and turned on the small desk lamp. The envelope was thin, containing just a single sheet of paper folded in half, written in shaky handwriting, as if the writer were rushed or afraid. I opened it, and the words hit me like a storm. "You're not sick. You're a victim. Your parents sold you as a test subject. My child was a victim too. They're brokers for an underground pharmaceutical organization. Investigate, Elliot." No signature, no address, just short, sharp sentences like stabs of a blade. I read it again, word by word, trying to make sense of it. Sold you as a test subject. Underground pharmaceutical organization. The words swirled in my head like a discordant song. I wanted to laugh, to think it was someone's sick joke, but deep down a small voice whispered, "You've always known something was wrong, haven't you?" I sat there, clutching the paper so tightly it crumpled. Memories flooded back, vivid as old film reels. The sterile white room when I was 9. The needles. Dr. Harris with his cold smile. My legs growing weak, then losing all feeling. My parents' sudden wealth, the SUV, the suburban house, the secretive late-night phone calls, and the way they looked at me like I was a debt they wanted to erase. All those fragments, once buried under layers of fear, now surfaced sharp and terrifying. But I didn't believe it right away. I couldn't. My parents, however cold, however cruel, were still my parents. They'd raised me, however half-heartedly. They'd given me a roof, even if I was just a shadow beneath it. How could they sell me? How could they do something so horrific? I stuffed the letter into my jacket pocket, determined to forget it. Maybe someone got it wrong. Maybe it was slander from someone jealous of my parents' wealth. But the letter wouldn't leave my mind. That night I lay in bed, eyes wide open in the dark, listening to the snores of those around me. I thought of Ryan, my innocent little brother, growing up with the love I never had. I thought of my father's words, "What do you have to contribute?" And then I thought of my legs, taken from me without explanation. If the letter was true, if my parents had done something to me, I had to find out. Not because I wanted revenge, at least not then, but because I needed the truth. I needed to know why my life had turned out this way. The next morning I started. I didn't have many clues, but the letter was a beginning. I asked Maria about how the letter arrived. She shrugged. "Some man left it at the front desk, didn't say anything." He was wearing a baseball cap, pulled low over his face. I didn't get a good look. A chill ran down my spine. Someone had deliberately tracked me down, left this letter, and didn't want to be identified. That made me curious, and a little afraid. I began with what I had, memories. I pulled an old notebook from my backpack and started writing down everything I could recall about the health checkup when I was 9. The white room, Dr. Harris, the cold metal table, the needles. I tried to remember more details, but they were hazy, like a half-forgotten dream. I kept writing. My parents' sudden wealth, the secretive phone calls, the stack of documents I'd seen in my father's study with words like clinical trial and compensation. I didn't know what they meant, but they were clues, and I clung to them like a drowning man to a lifeline. I decided to return to River Bottom, the neighborhood where I grew up. Maybe someone there knew something. I had no money, but the support center provided free bus passes for people with disabilities, and I used one. The journey back to River Bottom was a punch to the face. The neighborhood was unchanged. Dilapidated houses, the smell of engine oil and garbage, the tired faces of its residents. But to me, it was like an old painting full of memories and pain. I wheeled through the familiar streets, past the auto shop where my father used to work, past the pile of tires where Tommy and I used to play. Tommy. I wondered where he was now, if he still remembered me. I stopped in front of our old apartment. It was still there, but now occupied by someone else, with blue curtains and a child's bicycle parked out front. I stared at it, feeling like I was looking at another version of myself, the 9-year-old Elliot before everything fell apart. I didn't know what I expected, maybe an answer, a sign. But there was nothing, just the silence of the neighborhood. I decided to ask around among the old neighbors. Most had moved away, but I found Mrs. Rosa, an elderly woman who used to live across from us. She was sitting on her porch, knitting, her eyes clouded with age. When I introduced myself, she squinted, then gave a sad smile. Elliot? The boy who climbed the tire piles? My goodness, you've grown. I asked her about my parents, about the days they lived here. She sighed, her gaze distant. They changed after that time they took you somewhere. That day your mother was crying when they came back, but she wouldn't say why. Then suddenly they had money, moved out right away. Everyone thought it was strange, but no one dared ask. Mrs. Rosa's words lit a spark in my suspicions. I told her about the letter, what it said. She stopped knitting, looked at me, and lowered her voice. Elliot, a few kids from this neighborhood disappeared back then. No one knew where they went. There were rumors about a clinic, somewhere out on the highway. People said it wasn't a hospital, but a place for shady business. Do you remember where your parents took you? I nodded, my heart pounding. The White Room. Dr. Harris. I asked if she knew anything else, but she shook her head. You need to be careful. People like that, they don't like being dug into. I thanked her and wheeled away, my mind reeling. The letter wasn't a joke anymore. It was real. And if it was true, my parents hadn't just abandoned me, they'd done something far worse. I returned to the center carrying a new feeling, rage. It didn't flare up right away, but smoldered like embers under ash. I took out the letter, read it again. You're a victim? My child was a victim too. Who wrote this letter? What did they know? And why did they find me? I had no answers, but I knew I couldn't stop. I had to uncover the truth, no matter how painful. That night, I lay in bed, my notebook open before me. I added a new line. Find Dr. Harris. Find the clinic on the highway. That was the first step. I didn't know where it would lead, but I knew I was no longer the scared boy from that Thanksgiving night. The letter had awakened something in me, something I thought had died. I would find the truth no matter the cost. My investigation began with the smallest steps, like someone fumbling in the dark. I had no money, no connections, no experience. All I had was a smoldering rage and a determination I hadn't known I possessed. My first step was to track down my medical records. I remembered that after the health checkup when I was 9, my parents had taken me to the local hospital in River Bottom when I started getting weak. If there were any documents about my condition, they'd be there. I called the hospital, my voice trembling as I explained that I needed to see my old records. The person on the line told me I'd have to come in person with identification. I didn't have much, just an ID card my parents had gotten me a few years back. I stuffed it into my backpack, grabbed a free bus pass from the support center, and set off. The River Bottom Hospital was an old building, its hallways reeking of antiseptic and lined with peeling paint. I wheeled myself to the reception desk where a middle-aged woman was typing. I need to see my medical records from 2009, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She looked at me, a flicker of pity in her eyes, then asked for my ID. After some digging in the system, she handed me a thin folder. This is all we have on you, Elliot, she said, but some things aren't clear. I opened the folder right there, my heart pounding. The records stated I was diagnosed with an unspecified neurological disorder at 9 years old after being admitted for loss of lower limb mobility. But what chilled me was the note. No blood tests, no x-rays, no detailed reports explaining why I was paralyzed. Just a single handwritten line, faded, transferred from private medical facility, Dr. Harris. Dr. Harris. His name loomed like a ghost, pulling me back to that white room from years ago. I asked the woman at the desk if she knew anything about Dr. Harris or this private medical facility. She shook her head. Back then, small clinics popped up and disappeared all the time. No one kept track of them all. You might ask the state health department. They could have more information. I thanked her, tucked the folder into my backpack, and left, my mind reeling. The records didn't answer my questions, they only raised more. Why no tests? Why only Dr. Harris's name? And why didn't my parents ever take me for further treatment? I decided to investigate the clinic on the highway that Mrs. Rosa, my old neighbor, had mentioned. I returned to River Bottom, wheeling through familiar streets, asking anyone who might remember something from that time. Most people shook their heads or shared vague rumors, a mysterious clinic, delivery trucks arriving at night, children disappearing. But then I met Mr. Joe, a neighbor who used to visit our house when I was little. Now old, with white hair, he was sipping coffee at a small diner near the neighborhood. "That clinic?" Mr. Joe said, his voice raspy. "I remember it. It was a few miles out on Highway 71. A gray building, no sign. People said it was for drug testing, but no one dared go near it. Your parents took you there, didn't they?" I nodded, my heart racing. He continued, "They changed after that. Your dad, Carl, started having money, bought a new car, then moved away. I asked him what he did to get so rich, and he just laughed, said good business. But I knew. No one gets rich that fast, not in River Bottom." Mr. Joe's words were another stab. I asked if he knew anything about Dr. Harris. He shook his head. "Never met him. But I heard that clinic didn't just test drugs on adults. They used kids too, poor ones, orphans, or kids no one would notice." My blood ran cold. Kids no one would notice. That was me, wasn't it? A poor kid, easily forgotten, easily sold. I resolved to find the clinic Mr. Joe described, the gray building on Highway 71. I had no car, no money for a taxi, but I asked Maria at the support center to connect me with a local charity, and they arranged a free ride. The journey took nearly an hour through empty fields and quiet roads. When the car stopped in front of an old building, my heart tightened. It was the place, the gray building, no sign, with a heavy iron door and broken windows. But it was abandoned. Weeds grew thick around the entrance. The front door was secured with a rusted padlock, and there wasn't a soul in sight. I wheeled closer, peering through a window crack, but inside was only darkness and scattered debris of old furniture. If this had been a clinic, it was now an empty shell, as if it had never existed. I stood there under a gray sky, feeling like I'd touched a locked door. This clinic was my only lead, but it gave me nothing but disappointment. I thought of the anonymous letter, its sharp words. "You're a victim. Your parents sold you as a test subject." If the clinic was gone, there was only one place left to find answers: my parents' house. I remembered the documents in my father's study, words like clinical trial and compensation. Deciding to return to my parents' house wasn't easy. Just thinking about stepping into that house where I'd been called a burden made my chest tighten. But I needed the truth. And if it was in my father's drawers, I'd find a way to get it. I gathered my courage, packed my notebook and ID into my backpack, and took a bus to the fancy suburb. Standing before the white picket fence of the house, I felt like a stranger. The house, with its manicured lawn, cozy fireplace, and dinners I was never invited to, was now just a reminder of years of abandonment. I knocked, my heart pounding. My mother opened the door, her eyes hardening when she saw me. "Elliot?" she said, her voice betraying surprise and irritation. "What are you doing here?" Before I could answer, my father appeared behind her, his face as cold as it was on Thanksgiving. "What are you back for?" he asked, his voice sharp as a blade. "Didn't we make it clear? That night we announced the inheritance so you'd understand you have no place here. You left and we were glad because you finally got out. Why are you back?" His words were like a slap. I wanted to scream, to ask why they treated me this way, but I clenched my jaw, keeping my voice calm. I just came to pick up some old stuff. I'll stay a few days, then leave. I saw my mother glance at my father as if they were considering kicking me out again. Finally, she sighed. Fine, but don't cause trouble. They didn't ask how I'd been living, eating, or sleeping since I left. Their coldness cut deeper than any insult. They didn't care. They never had. I was allowed inside, wheeling through the wide hallways that were once my home but now felt as foreign as a hotel. Ryan was at school, so the house was quiet, with only my mother's whispers in the kitchen and the sound of my father's TV in the living room. They let me stay in my old room untouched, with its single bed and bookshelf, as if time hadn't passed. But I wasn't here for nostalgia. I was here for the truth. The first night, I waited until my parents went to bed. The house sank into darkness, lit only by streetlights filtering through the windows. I wheeled to my father's study, a room he always locked when I was young. Now the door was unlocked, perhaps because they thought I was gone for good. I slipped inside, turned on the desk lamp, and started searching. The drawers were full of bills and contracts, but nothing stood out. I checked the bookshelf under the desk, even the trash can. Nothing. The second night, I nearly gave up, thinking I'd been mistaken. But on the third night, when my parents went to a dinner party, I returned to the study. I opened the bottom drawer of the desk, the one my father used to call off limits to kids. It was locked, but I found a small key hidden under the rug. With trembling hands, I opened it, and there it was. A thick folder bound with a rubber band labeled Medvance Contract 2009. I flipped through it, my heart pounding. It contained bank transfer receipts from Medvance Pharmaceuticals to my parents' account, totaling tens of thousands of dollars, with notes like brokerage services and clinical trial, Subject E. Subject E. I knew it was me. Another document listed other children with notes like neurological damage or deceased. A handwritten note in my father's handwriting read, Elliot's success. Continue cooperation. I sat there in the dim lamplight, tears streaming down my face. My parents hadn't just sold me, they'd used me to pave the way for a horrific network, supplying poor and orphaned children to Medvance for dangerous drug trials. I was the first case, the commodity that made them rich. I copied the documents, stuffed the folder into my backpack, and left the next morning without a goodbye. I didn't need one. They'd taken my legs, and now I'd take back the truth. I returned to my small room at the support center, clutching the documents I'd taken from my parents' house. The receipts, contracts, and notes from Medvance Pharmaceuticals were damning evidence, proving that my parents, Carl and Linda, had sold me and other children as test subjects. The list of 17 names in the documents, with cold notes like neurological damage or deceased, made my heart clench. I couldn't let people like them continue to escape justice. But I knew that to bring down Medvance and my parents, I needed more voices. Other victims like me. I started with the list. I searched online, sent messages, made calls, even wrote handwritten letters. Not everyone responded, but I found Angela, the mother of Marcus, a boy who, like me, was paralyzed after a health checkup in 2009. Angela shared that my mother, Linda, had tricked her into joining a fake medical program. She smiled so warmly, Angela said, choking up. But Marcus never walked again. I empathized with her loss. I shared the evidence I'd gathered, and Angela agreed to fight alongside me. I kept reaching out, finding 7 other victims. Emily, a girl now reliant on a ventilator to survive. David, who lost his brother after one of those checkups. And others, each carrying a wound from Medvance. We formed an anonymous group called The Survivors, meeting in an abandoned church. Everyone shared their stories, their pain, and their rage. I felt a heavy responsibility, but also strength in our unity. I contacted Lauren Carter, a human rights lawyer, via email. She invited me to her office, reviewed the documents, and listened to my story. "This is a big case, Elliot," she said, her eyes serious. "But it's dangerous. Are you ready?" I nodded, thinking of the names on the list. Lauren helped us file a class action lawsuit in federal court that March, naming Medvance and my parents as defendants. The media exploded, calling me the man suing his own family. Some supported me, others called me a traitor. But I didn't care. I had evidence. I had survivors, and I had the truth. The legal battle began, and I knew it would be fierce. The trial took place on a rainy day in June, 3 months after we filed the lawsuit. That day, in the cold federal courtroom in Cleveland, I wheeled myself in, my heart pounding, facing dozens of eyes from spectators, reporters, and the survivors seated behind me. Lauren Carter, our lawyer, stood beside me, clutching her briefcase. Across from us were Medvance's legal team, men in expensive suits, and my parents, Carl and Linda, sitting silently, their eyes avoiding mine. I never imagined facing my parents like this. They had once been my entire world, but now they were the people who sold me, using me to fuel their criminal network. Lauren opened the case, presenting the evidence. The documents from my parents' house, bank transfer receipts from Medvance, and testimonies from 8 victims, including Marcus, Emily, David, and me. She described how Medvance tested dangerous drugs on poor children, with my parents acting as brokers, luring families with money and false promises. My parents denied the charges. My father stood, his voice trembling but defiant. "Elliot is an ungrateful son. He's making this up out of jealousy for his brother, Ryan. We only did what was best for the family." His words cut like a knife, echoing that Thanksgiving night when he called me a burden. My mother looked down, silent, but I saw her hands tremble. They called me a traitor, claiming I fabricated the story to ruin them. Medvance's legal team attacked us too, labeling us opportunists and demanding the case be dismissed for lack of evidence. But Lauren didn't waver. She presented the bank transfer records from Medvance to my parents, totaling hundreds of thousands of dollars, marked with notes like brokerage services and trial Subject E. Subject E was me. She shared Angela's testimony about how my mother deceived her. Emily, frail and trembling, spoke through her ventilator. "I was never asked for consent. They injected something into me, and now I live like this." David spoke of his brother who never came home. Each testimony was a hammer blow against Medvance and my parents. I was called to testify. Wheeling to the stand, I felt my parents' eyes weighing on me. I recounted the year I was 9, the White Room, Dr. Harris, the loss of my legs, and my parents' sudden wealth. "They called me a burden," I said, my voice catching. "But they're the burden. To me, to Marcus, to Emily, to everyone they destroyed." The courtroom fell silent. I saw my mother bow her head, tears falling. But my father just glared at me, his eyes full of rage. Medvance's lawyers tried to discredit me, claiming I was mentally unstable due to my family's rejection. But Lauren countered, presenting internal Medvance emails, obtained from an anonymous source, confirming they knew the drugs caused neurological damage but continued anyway. The evidence was too clear, too overwhelming. And after 3 weeks of intense proceedings, the jury delivered its verdict. I remember the air that day, clear and cool outside, but inside the courtroom the tension was like a rubber band stretched to its limit. The judge, an older man with a stern demeanor and eyes sharp as blades, stood to read the charges. The final verdict. Carl and Linda were convicted of federal human trafficking, child abuse, and participating in illegal medical trials. They were sentenced to 40 years in federal prison. Their entire estate was seized and distributed among the victims. I, Elliot, as the first victim with lasting damage, was awarded $1.2 million from their liquidated assets. Medvance was fined tens of millions of dollars, and several executives were arrested for further investigation. I sat there hearing the verdict but felt no triumph. I felt empty. My parents were handcuffed and led away. My mother turned back, whispering, "Elliot, I'm sorry." But her apology came too late. I didn't respond, just wheeled out of the courtroom carrying a heavy heart. Now, over 10 years have passed since that verdict. I'm still Elliot, still in my creaky wheelchair, still visiting the Disability Support Center in Ohio every week. Outside the window, the rain still falls. But today, I'm not here to hide or lament my fate. I'm here to tell my story. A story of loss, betrayal, but also of struggle and hope. 10 years ago, I stood up against the people who gave me life, Carl and Linda, who turned me into a test subject for Medvance in exchange for money and status. I lost my legs, my childhood, but I didn't lose my voice. I uncovered the truth, rallied other survivors like Marcus and Emily to step into the light. And we won, not just in court, but in reclaiming our dignity. Today I sit before a support group, a young girl who lost her leg in an accident, an older man with trembling hands, and share my story. The white room when I was 9. The Thanksgiving night my parents called me a burden. The anonymous letter that woke me from silence, and the journey to find justice. When I finish, the girl whispers, "If you could do it, I can too." I smile, not because I'm a hero, but because I see myself in their eyes. Survivors who never gave up. I used the $1.2 million settlement to found Survivors Voice, an organization that supports victims of illegal medical trials, providing counseling, care, and most importantly, a listening ear. But the most important message I want to share, not just with them, but with you, reading these words, is this: you are not a burden. No matter how many times life knocks you down, no matter if the people you love most abandon you, you carry within you an incredible strength, the strength to rise in your own way. I lost my legs, but in that loss I found my voice. And if I can do that, so can you. Live, speak out, let the world know you deserve to be heard. Wishing you peace and all things good.